everybody, welcome to The Art of Guitar. I decided to watch the entire Back to the Beginning concert when I got back from my gig a few days ago, and I went back and reviewed it, and I just took a bunch of notes, like a bunch of bullet points throughout the entire concert. And I thought instead of doing a full review, because it's a 9-hour concert, I would actually just talk through the bullet points and get through this without too much dragging on. Once they make it available, check out the entire concert if you haven't seen it yet. Obviously, it's a legendary thing to see. So we'll do this quick. I'll go from band to band in the order that they played, and let's just go for it. So Mastodon actually kicked off the entire thing, which is an awesome band to start off with. Actually, one of my friends and fellow YouTuber guitarist, Ben Eller, was in the band for a little while, and I just kept thinking how epic that would have been just to see him on stage with that band. I was really impressed by the production. You know, obviously they're not going to spare any expense for something like this. One of my favorite shots during the set was when they went back to back to do the dueling solo during Blood and Thunder. I thought that was a really cool thing. And then during Supernaut, they had 3 incredible drummers come out to form this kind of mini drum circle. You've got Danny Carey from Tool, you have Eloy from Slipknot, who, by the way, I wonder if that's the mystery band that was going to play, but got kicked off or whatever happened. I have no idea. And then you have Mario from Gojira. I just wonder what it's like to look out when you're drumming and see those 3 guys playing along with you. I mean, that must have been nuts. The next band up was Rival Sons, and I don't know too much about this band, but they were really, really good. Sadly, the mix for the live stream was kind of touch and go. You know, for some bands, it sounded incredible. For Rival Sons, everything sounded great, except the guitars were really sunk into the mix, which is weird because the beginning of the set, the guitar player was going off and doing some cool stuff, but it was so low, it sounded almost like an echo. I know it wasn't like that at the real show, so it's kind of a bummer to, you know, be at home watching and not hearing much guitar. Because when the bass came in, the bass was roaring loud, and I thought, man, that would have been great if the guitars could have been at that level too. I love how they did an overhead shot of the drummer, and he actually had a set list next to him, which is hilarious because they only played 3 songs. So it's like, here's your set list, don't forget this order. Right off the bat, I noticed every time they would show somebody in the audience close up, everybody did the metal salute. If you watch the whole concert, you'll see it happen like a million times. You know, a couple people had a few creative ideas, but almost everybody just did the old devil horns, you know. I'm sure I would have done it too, because when you're on the spot, I mean, what else do you do? The singer is a great front man. I'm sorry, I don't know a lot of these musicians' names. Like I said, I don't know too much about the band, but he reminded me kind of like Grizzly Adams meets Robert Plant in a way, and he was dressed up kind of in this dress suit, but he was barefoot. Okay, the singer's name is Jay Buchanan. I forgot. I got excited when I looked in the background and I could see Scott Ian warming up. And I'm like, oh man, I'm actually going to see Anthrax on this thing. By the way, I did not know all the bands that were going to be on it, so it was pretty much a surprise. Like, I knew about the bigger ones, but there were a lot of times where I was like, oh, cool, I didn't even know that they were here, and I would high-five myself because I was by myself watching it. There was this kind of mini catwalk in front of the stage that some of the singers would go out on, and Jay actually went out and he was screaming and he fell to the ground. It was this epic moment, you know, and then when he came back, he had to hurdle over the top of these monitors, which I thought were ill-placed. You know, whenever you put monitors across like that in front of a catwalk, you're asking for trouble. A lot of singers, you know, I played on stage quite a bit with these singers that go out in front, and when they sing, they tend to walk backwards without looking, and I just thought, man, who's going to be the first person to just fall on their ass? I figured it would be Axl Rose probably, but... Okay, next was Anthrax, and like I said, I was real excited to watch them. I saw Pantera recently, so I saw Charlie on the drums for that, so it was really cool to see him back with his original band Anthrax, and all of them standing in a circle, just waiting to kick off the song Indians, and when they did, I freaked out. Kind of a spoiler, but I feel like this band was the most excited as a full band to be on that stage. Like, everybody had huge smiles on their faces, everybody seemed to be giving their all, and you know, they did this close-up of Frank Bello, just bellowing out, if you will, on part of the song, and he just looked like he was giving everything. They had cameras everywhere for this. You could see every angle, and they even had people on stage with cameras, but I felt bad because I noticed this one guy picking up this camera. It looked like it weighed 900 pounds or something. I'm like, okay, I appreciate the quality they're going for. I mean, this stuff looked top-notch, but that must have been a drag to have to carry a camera, especially if you're there most of the 9 hours, you know? The beginning riff of Into the Void is so stanky. And of course, Scott Ian played it, you know, and did it justice. And when the band kicked in, it was just so grooving. But this is kind of funny because throughout the night, I noticed something. Whenever the bands would have to play a Sabbath cover, and they never played it before, you could tell they were kind of on wobbly baby deer legs sometimes. So the singer, for example, Joey here, you could tell he was reading off the teleprompter, and there's just this feeling of uncertainty, and it's kind of exciting though at the same time. Whenever you're in a band and you play a song for the first time live, I should say, there's this excitement but also anxiousness to it. You can kind of feel that when these bands would play some of these covers. Next was Halestorm, and that was kind of interesting to me, that choice of putting Halestorm after Anthrax. I feel like if you look at longevity and just, things these bands have done for their scenes, I feel like Anthrax should have went after Halestorm. I'm a little bit biased though. But Lizzie brought it the entire night. I thought she wasn't going to have a voice left after this concert because she was doing these screams and she went so crazy one time you could hear another tone happen in her throat. She was pulling like a Janis Joplin at times. Her drummer's like a master of flipping his sticks and catching them. That was pretty impressive. I love that they chose Perry Mason to cover. A lot of these bands chose really interesting, songs from either Ozzy or Sabbath. And Perry Mason's one that I kind of forgot about, but it was sort of a hit back in the day. They used to play that one on the radio quite a bit. Next up was Lamb of God, and I was excited because I didn't know they were going to be on this show. So when they came out, total chills. Just like when I saw them open for Metallica a while ago, Randy was all over the stage. That guy is mobile. I still miss his dreads though. I thought those always looked really cool. When they did the breakdown to Laid to Rest, that was so epic. I used to be in a band. I I played bass for a couple of shows, and we played Laid to Rest, and we also played Redneck, which they also played. So seeing all those breakdowns and seeing the pit, it was just one of those things that brought back those memories of how powerful that music is, not just to listen to, but to play. When they kicked into Children of the Grave, I couldn't believe it. I was kind of bummed though, because that meant that Sabbath wasn't going to play it live, but if anyone else is going to play it, maybe Pantera could have done it justice as well, but Lamb of God playing it was just awesome. Not sure if their guitars are used to being tuned to that, because they were a little bit out of tune with each other. I wonder if maybe their guitar techs were like, man, we got to tune down for this one quite a bit. So sometimes they would hold out a chord and you'd hear a little bit of dissonance, between the two guitars. Randy actually sang on this, which I'm not used to. Usually he just does his real intense, gravelly yell. So when he was singing, I thought he sounded a little bit like Danzig. I don't know if you agree. By the way, I'm just showing mini clips you probably noticed because the Osborne camp are really good at just copywriting everything. I woke up the next day and went on YouTube and everything was taken down basically. So like I said, Randy was all over the stage and I think he got a little too excited during this song and actually fell over backwards, but like a pro, he just kind of did this backward roll, got up, and he just kept going. The crowd pumping their fists during the breakdown part of that song, the bridge part, is so epic. That's already one of my favorite Sabbath riffs of all time, and then to see this entire stadium just going nuts for it was great. Okay, we're up to Supergroup A, and I believe Tom Morello had a lot to do with putting these musicians together, and he did a great job. And obviously Sharon Osbourne did too, putting this whole thing together. But Tom Morello played a key part in getting Jakey Lee to come in, and I think if that's all he did for this show, it would have been worth it. But when they announced him, I'm like, no way, this is crazy. And then they're like, hey, where's Jake? Like, he didn't come out for the first 30 seconds. I don't know if that was planned out, but the band seriously looked stumped. They're like, oh no, what do we do? And then he finally comes out and the whole band looks relieved, and Nuno's like, man, like a true rock star coming out like that. Them playing The Ultimate Sin though was so cool, and Lzzy Hale once again gave it her all. She sounds great doing those low guttural, yelling type singing. It was also very cool to see Dave Ellefson up there because, I kept thinking this whole show is missing Megadeth. My heart dropped when I heard the guitar tones being really low in the mix once again. And I just kept thinking, man, whoever's doing the mixing for the live stream has a lot on their plate, but at least bring the guitars up, when Nuno, I know I'm biased, and Jakey Lee are playing. We got to hear those things. Speaking of Nuno Bettencourt, he did a lot of heavy lifting. I even left a comment on his Facebook or his Instagram, I'm not sure, but I'm like, man, you really held things together when it could have fallen apart easily. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But even during the solo for Ultimate Sin, Nuno was mirroring basically what Jakey Lee was doing. It was great seeing Mike Borden back at the drums just because I remember him my whole life, all the way from Faith No More, seeing them open up for Metallica and Guns N' Roses way back in the day at the Metrodome, and then to see him playing with Ozzy and Black Sabbath during Ozfest that one time that I saw that. Of course, as a guitar player who loves Jakey Lee, getting chills when he pulls out the old white Charvel. But then something kind of dumb happened. David from Disturbed came out, and I think there was a mixture of boos. I think it's a little bit of his political stuff that he posts, just some of the crowd wasn't into that. So he comes out and they're about to kick into, I would say, probably my favorite Ozzy song, Shot in the Dark. So the band starts and I'm waiting for Jakey to play the legendary riff for that song. But David comes in with the vocals. And you could tell Jakey Lee's a little bit discombobulated, if I can use that word, because he kind of stops and then he starts hitting a couple weird notes and he makes this like frustrated gesture. And I'm like, man, I wonder if he's like, dude, you just ruined my whole intro. If he wasn't thinking that, all of us were. But, you know, David did a great job with vocals. You know, obviously he's a great singer and he's got such a strong sound and a great presence. But that was a bummer to cut off the beginning of something like that. I think a lot of these vocalists, if they didn't already, have a brand new respect for singing Ozzy and how difficult it can be. Because even these singers that have been doing it their whole life, they were struggling at times to hit some of those old school Ozzy notes, you know. The Sleep Token drummer was great. You know, I just kept feeling bad for him because it looked like a hot stage, you know, but he had to wear the mask and all the coverings and all that stuff. And I just thought, man, I never want to be in a band where I have to wear a mask of any kind or a costume because I'd be dying up there. At first, I had no idea who the singer was that came up. I'm just like, who's this guy? Is he somebody's like uncle or something? Turns out it's the singer from Ugly Kid Joe, who I used to love back in the day. And he was still singing great. He was jumping off the riser. He was doing all sorts of cool stuff. So that was really good to see. They brought out this guy named Youngblood, which is cool because, you know, you want to have some, pardon the pun, young blood in the mix during all this stuff. Because, you know, if you just have all the legends and all the people that have been around a while, that's great. But I feel like you always have to inject like the next generation into this. I thought it was the singer of Ice Nine Kills, to tell you the truth at first. I caught a little bit of the Jack Black thing. I thought that was cool, you know, speaking of the next generations to come, you know, to keep metal alive. And so I thought that was cool that they did that. Okay, up next is Alice in Chains, and you know, obviously you're not going to fill the shoes of Lane Staley, but you know, the singer that they have now, William Duvall, I believe his name is. I'm so bad with names. He does it justice, at least. You could tell that he does his own thing, but he's able to sing those Lane Staley parts just fine. You know, obviously no one's going to be Lane Staley, like I said. But I love how they come out. There's no intro that I could hear. Maybe it just wasn't coming through the stream, and all of a sudden they kick into Man in the Box. It's just like, okay, they're just going to go right into that. It was badass. They had all these 8x10 bass cabinets, all these half stacks and full stacks. And I thought, man, amps are back. You know, this isn't one of those concerts that everybody's going to be using a modeler or anything like that. So it was cool to see the old school stage back. It was kind of a bummer because they didn't have Jerry's vocal mic up in the mix on the stream. So he was doing backups. He was doing all these important parts and you couldn't hear it. So that's another one of those stream anomalies. It was great seeing Sean Kinney back on the drum kit. You know, that brought back some memories. When they kicked into Fairies Wear Boots, though, it was kind of funny because it was one of those awkward cover moments where, how does this go again? Like Jerry Cantrell started off with a riff and it's sort of a deceiving riff to find the beat on if you don't really know it really well. So Sean's kind of like guessing and then they stopped and they're like, let's just start over. Let's just do it again. Up next is Gojira, who I just saw live not too long ago, and they blew my face off, basically. They started off with Stranded. It was so kick-ass. I was kind of hoping, though, that they were going to start off with the song that they started off when I saw them, which was Born for One Thing. That's just such a great opening tune. Now, unlike the drummer in Hailstorm, when Mario throws his drumsticks up, he doesn't even try to catch them sometimes. It just comes down and crashes on the crash. I thought that was great. They had those gigantic beach balls going all over the place, which is kind of a new thing, I think. I don't remember seeing that a long time ago, but recently it was at Metallica, and they were so crazy at the Metallica show, you always had to keep watch, because one of those things is really heavy. If it just lands on your head, I can see it just cranking your neck to the side if you're not really paying attention. But when I saw it with Metallica, these balls were going on stage, and one of them knocked over some of Lars Ulrich's microphones. When they played Mea Culpa, it was pretty sweet because they brought out an opera singer lady, and she killed it. She was even headbanging and everything, and it was really cool to hear a clash of styles happen. I wish the live feed would have had more crowd sound come through because at times you couldn't hear the crowd at all. So Joe would say something to the crowd and there was like no response, and it really made it seem like the crowd was dead. I kept thinking I was seeing 6'6" Samus in the front row. I'm like, oh my God, good for him. He got to go to this concert. And then later on, he actually posted on his social media. He's like, guys, that wasn't me. That's like my doppelganger or something. Then they had this drum off, which is a really cool idea. You know, sometimes when someone does a drum solo during a concert, it can get a little bit boring. But to have three legendary legendary drummers up there. I mean, you got Danny Carey up there, you got Travis Barker, and you have Will Ferrell. I'm just kidding. You have Chad Smith. So they're playing to Symptom of the Universe, and what's really cool about that is they were taking turns, doing their drum thing, and then they would continue the song. And it was pretty good, but you could tell there's a lot of confusion. They're looking at each other like, do you go this time? Do I go? What's going on? Travis was doing his catching the drumstick trick. You probably learned that in band or whatever back in the day. Drum line. Sorry. And then during Danny Carey's part, it was funny because he was doing some really awesome, crazy rudiments, and the band was trying to hit on the one every time. And you could tell that there were times where people were like, where's the one? Oh my God. Oh, another cool thing, obviously Rudy Sarzo had to be there. And I love watching him play. One time we opened up for one of his bands. He was playing in the Guess Who for some reason for a while. And my Heart Tribute Band opened for them. And I never got to meet him, but I got to see him close up on stage, which was cool. And I love when he flips his hand over and plays like that. It's a cool little trick. Then there was Supergroup B, headed by Billy Corgan this time on vocals, and they did Breaking the Law, and just to see KK Downing up there was really crazy. But you could finally hear the guitars, man. When Breaking the Law started, it's almost like when KK's up there, you're going to turn up those guitars. Billy did all right, he pulled it off. The crowd went crazy when they announced him, but I wonder if he was even like, man, it's not easy to sing Priest. I found out that I've been playing the riff to Breaking the Law wrong. When I was watching KK play it, I had no idea he reaches up to the 5th fret during the second half of that riff. Now I got to change the way I do it. Then Sammy Hagar came out, and it got a little loosey-goosey, if you will. He kicked into Flying High again, and his attitude is so awesome, though. He seems like a cool drunk uncle on stage or something, and you could tell he just could not pinpoint the melody of Flying High Again, the verse. He was searching, he was looking at the teleprompter, but when it came to Mama's Gonna Worry, that part, he was fine. But he laughed it off like he does for a lot of things. And, he brings a good energy, if you will. Sounds cheesy to say that, but he does to the stage. And it was great to see Nuno Bettencourt play the solo to Flying High Again. There's so much Randy Rhoads intertwined in this show. It really wasn't until the end, though, that they really started to kind of bring up images of Randy, and I'll talk about that later. And just like Danny earlier, Chad Smith was laying it down steady like a rock, just like he's known for. They brought out the singer for Ghost, and it's funny because I remember seeing them open for Maiden one time, and whenever he talks to the crowd, it's weird. It's like he goes into this different voice. He's like, are you ready to rock? The crowd kind of was like, what? That's kind of cheesy, dude, But he's saying Bark at the Moon really, really well. It's like perfect for his voice to sing that tune. Vernon Reid was up there. It was cool to see him up there, but two things about what I noticed. His tone was kind of screechy, and then he wasn't really playing the riff for Bark at the Moon like Nuno Bettencourt was. So once again, Bettencourt's doing the heavy lifting. Vernon was kind of just hitting, just sort of accenting with that crazy tone. But in the end, it worked out, with those two together. If he was just Vernon up there, it would have been a little bit wild, like a lot of Living Colour songs are, and that's what I love about them. But when it's in the context of playing an Ozzy tune, especially with Jakey Lee backstage, that must have been a trip. To play Bark at the Moon, you need that tight palm muting. Then they brought out two huge legends, Steven Tyler and Ron Wood, which I had no idea was going to happen. That was so cool. But before they brought out Steven Tyler, you could hear him like yelling, kind of like freaking out, like, there's no mic, there's no mic.
Run, I got no mic.
And I don't think he knew, but it was coming through the main PA system. So he had mic, it just wasn't going to his in-ear system or something. So that was kind of weird. Now, when Steven Tyler finally comes out, it's almost like the entire stage elevated by 10 levels. It's like this true rock star. Not that the other guys aren't, but there's just something about Steven Tyler. He comes out, it's just like, this is next level right here. His presence, he looked great, his voice sounded really good, and I kept thinking, man, too bad Aerosmith called it quits. I'm wondering if they're gonna, rescind on that. Just because of the way Steven Tyler was commanding the stage and the audience. It's like, this guy has done it his entire life. Ron Wood looked like he always does. He's just there for the party. I'm surprised he didn't have a martini in his hand, But he's playing, he's just doing all his classic licks. And then they do this solo part, and they put it to Ronnie, and he's soloing, and he's like, screw this. He reaches in his pocket and grabs a slide and just starts doing these crazy slide licks. If you ever think Aerosmith music is easy to play, it's not. Walk This Way is actually very difficult to play, especially live, to really get in sync together. So that's one of those tricky riffs. Even Nuno was kind of like, oh man. Then they kick in A Whole Lot of Love, but just a little part of it. And that's when I knew Steven Tyler was on point, because he was doing those Robert Plant screams just perfectly. He had a lot of body to his voice. It's not like when you get older and your voice gets a little bit thinner, and more frail. It sounded really strong. And this was probably one of the best endings to any of the sets. They get done and Chad Smith is just going off, and then he like kicks the kick drum to knock it over, but it won't fall over because there's probably something in the front to keep it from falling. But that would have been great if he went all like old school Nirvana and just destroyed the drum kit at the end. And then Nuno threw his guitar up, but I think he carefully caught it because that thing's got to be worth a lot of money, and it's awesome. As they're coming off the stage, you can see Rudy Sarzo just have this gigantic smile on his face, and I'm like, that's the high that we're all chasing as musicians. Like, we just destroyed out there, and now we get to just hang out and party. Okay, up next was Pantera, and I just saw them with Metallica not too long ago. We also saw them the night before at First Avenue. We were able to get tickets to that exclusive crazy show. That was epic. I did a whole review on that. Now, I didn't realize Jason Momoa was going to be, basically introducing a lot of the bands. So when I first turned on the concert, after my concert the other night, I saw him in the pit and I was like, oh my God, what's he doing there? I had no idea he was part of the show. Behind the kit, we had Charlie and we had Zakk Wylde. And of course we have Rex on bass, so still a formative band, even if a lot of people are like, it's not Pantera anymore, but it's still a killer band. Seeing Zakk up there, I was just like, oh man, that's right. He's with Pantera. And then later he's going to come back and do his thing with Ozzy. I kept thinking back to shows I've seen in my life, and I saw Ozzy way back in the No More Tours tour with Zakk Wylde. And Zakk was running all around. He actually jumped off stage, went all the way up the stairs, and he had his chaps on. It was a wild time. That's back when he was real skinny Zakk. His guitar, sadly, was low in the mix once again, and he's got this weird chorusy doubling effect happening. And I think that's so that he can sound bigger live, but through the live stream, feed, it sounded kind of goofy. They did an awesome medley where they cut off Cowboys from Hell halfway through and went into Walk. And that's when the crowd just went insane and Jason Momoa almost got swallowed up by the pit. They played Planet Caravan, which I figured they would, And Phil couldn't really remember what album that was off of. He's like, was that Far Beyond Driven? And it killed me to see Charlie playing these little bongos with drumsticks for the entire song. Sounded great. And then they played Electric Funeral. And of course, it was doomy as ever with Pantera playing it. Up next was Tool, and one of my favorite bands. They come out. It's weird seeing them playing in the broad daylight, though. The few times I've seen Tool, it's always been indoors. It's always been real dark. There's always these cool images flashing, great video work, lasers and everything. So to see them just out in the open in the sun was kind of interesting. I noticed Maynard had this brace on his wrist, and I wondered if maybe he injured it training jiu-jitsu. Because when they came to Minnesota, my friend who's actually a jiu-jitsu teacher, he trained Maynard that day. So Maynard's been known to do that. When he travels, he'll train somewhere close by and then play the show. So maybe somebody wrist locked him or something, who knows. They played Hand of Doom, and I'm starting to realize that I'm not as big of a Sabbath fan as I thought, because I had to go back and listen to some of these covers that these bands were playing, and I'm like, that's weird. I never really knew about that song before. I kept noticing Danny has this awesome purple ride cymbal that just kind of hovers over him like a UFO, and there's actually a 414 mic placed right above it, so it gets its own microphone. That's when you know you've made it big, when you can do something like that. They ended with Anima, which was killer, because they played it a little bit faster than album speed, and sometimes Tool gets in this thing where they almost sound like they're playing their album at perfect speed and everything. And I don't always like that, because I like it when a band can make things more live when it's live. And so them playing it faster was really cool. I did not know Slayer was going to be on the show, so once again, I got excited. We've got half of the original Slayer that I knew growing up, but just to see Tom up there singing, and he actually sounded really good. And obviously Kerry King. I was missing Dave Lombardo, and I always will whenever it comes to Slayer, even though Paul was doing a great job on the drums. And then you had Gary Holt from Exodus on the other guitar. When they kicked into War Ensemble, I kept an eye on the pit, because that was probably one of the most intense pits of the night. I remember way back in the day seeing them at a show called Clash of the Titans, and people were moshing to Slayer, and they would come out with bloody faces, and there was a medical tent nearby, and everybody would just make a beeline to that tent. It was so crazy. By the way, War Ensemble is one of my favorite Kerry King solos. I mean, he's doing that tap headbang thing that Joe from Gojira does as well. It's just a really great solo. He pulls it off really well too. They really shocked me when they kicked into Wicked World because it has that swing hi-hat in the beginning. I thought Slayer would never play something like this. Are they just kind of messing with us? But they actually did play the song. And they were intertwining it with their songs, so they kicked into South of Heaven, which is great. I love the kid giving the middle fingers to the camera. I mean, that just kind of says everything right there. Another highlight of this set is when Tom does the scream for Angel of Death. You just got to hear it for yourself. And then it was time for Guns N' Roses. And, you know, back in the day, like I was talking about, I saw Faith No More with Metallica and Guns N' Roses, and that was the order. But for this show, Guns N' Roses went before Metallica. But I just remember in the old days when Guns were like the big band, you know, Metallica was huge, obviously, too. But at the time, Guns N' Roses was just at this crazy level. And Axl was late to the show, and he was just doing the rock star thing. But Axl starts off on a piano, which I thought was funny because I bet you the road crew was like, oh my God, we got to get a piano for you, like a real one, just so you could play like 1 minute of an intro and then not play it for the rest of the show. And Axl's like, yeah, duh. And then they played Junior's Eyes, which is another song that isn't really big on my zeitgeist for Black Sabbath. I should just take this shirt off now. Okay, so I have to admit, you know, it's kind of the elephant in the room. Everybody knows that Axl does not sing the same. You know, I think to be able to sing anymore, he has to go into that falsetto tone every time he sings. And it's hard for me to get used to that. I don't think I'll ever get used to that. But I'm just glad to see him up there, you know, after all these years still singing. And Slash, by the way, was pulling a lot of the weight. Every time they went to one of his solos, the band felt like the old Guns N' Roses again. And he had some incredible guitars like that Black SG. That's one I've been drooling over for years. One day we'll have a guitar like that. And like I mentioned before, back in the rock star days of Axl Rose, he's changed so much over the years. Now he seems a lot more zen. You know, there's a time where he's talking to the audience and he trips over his pedals on stage.
And you. Thank you for having us. As I trip over some shit.
And I kept thinking the old Axl probably would have like screamed, thrown the pedal board out into the audience and like punched his roadie. I don't know. I kept noticing that Axl would go ahead of the beat with his vocals and then he wouldn't adjust sometime. And it's like the whole band just had to keep it together, you know, try to keep on beat, try to keep on time, while Axl is like pulling way far ahead. And he did that in some really important parts, like in Welcome to the Jungle, he did that. And a few other times where I'm just like, Axl, can't you hear where the beat is? That was weird. The old Axl came back for a second right before Welcome to the Jungle, when he asked everybody, do you know where you are? It's like he finally had like a bit of grit with his falsetto voice. I love how they kept showing this blonde lady in the audience. No, I mean it. I loved when they kept showing this blonde lady in the audience. If you watch the video at the very end, you could hear Axl say something. I don't know if he meant to say it in the mic, but he says something like, you know how much I had to work through?
You know how much I want to throw you.
And I wonder if he just meant like, man, that was a tough set or something. But it's weird that that came through in the feed. All right, we're up to Metallica. Now, I believe they're on this huge world tour. You know, I saw them not too long ago, so it was really great that they could break away and actually play this concert. They actually open with a cover with Hole in the Sky, which I thought was very daring because, you know, Metallica's actually pretty good at covers. Garage Days is actually one of my favorite albums by them with all covers, but they started with that. Usually they start with Creeping Death or something really comfortable to them, Whiplash or something like that. So I thought that was a really brave move for them to do it, and they pulled off the song really well. They ended tight. I wonder if they played that before. But then they kicked into Creeping Death right after that. I loved when James was like, you know, thank you, Black Sabbath, for giving us a purpose in life. That was really meaningful to hear James say that. I also noticed that James and Kirk were struggling a little bit with their lead parts, you know, especially this part. I wonder if it was just muggy and hot, and sometimes that makes it really hard to play. Those outdoor gigs can be brutal. Now, they didn't only open with a cover. Later on, they played Johnny Blade. It's kind of another strange pick, in my opinion. But it does fit their style, you know, especially in the Load era. Kind of felt like it would fit in then. I feel like the crowd needed a little bit of inspiration, and so when they played the intro to Battery over the PA system, you could tell people were like, okay, here we go. And then they kick in with Battery, and the pitch just went insane during that part. At the end of the song, Lars is just beating the crap out of his cymbals. He's really an abuser of cymbals, if you noticed. He even hits it with his fist. Then they play Master of Puppets. I mean, they're just unrelenting for this set. And then at the end, they try to get together to, say goodbye to everybody, and James just knocks his microphone out of the way, which is funny because it's not a cheap mic. It's like a $300 dynamic mic. But to him, he's just like, get out of the way. Up next is the man himself. He comes out of the floor on a chair, and there's a guy behind him, like making sure everything's cool, nothing's getting caught under the stage. And then he pulls Ozzy's chair backwards to put him like next to the rest of the band. That Ozzy intro has always gotten to me, when I first bought Tribute when I was a kid, hearing that and then hearing, the band start and Randy Rhoads and all that stuff. It's really great memories. And Ozzy says, let the madness begin. And then they kick into I Don't Know, which I did not think they were going to do. All of a sudden you have Zakk Wylde out there, back where he belongs, with Ozzy, and you have Mike Inez on bass. You've got Adam Wakeman on the keys. I didn't know who the drummer was, but his name's Tommy, and he killed it. He had the energy, he was moving around, and he was rock solid. It's, all you can ask for in a drummer. Oh, he was cool looking too. That helps. When I watched the video that I got, I heard the crowd go nuts about a minute into the song, and I thought maybe they showed a video of Randy Rhoads or something. But what it ended up being was there was some technical issue where they didn't have the live feed on the big screens for people till like a minute and a half in or something. And as soon as they could see Ozzy on the big screen, the whole place went crazy. Ozzy actually sounded really great for the first 3 songs, I would say. And then, his voice started to get a little bit weak and he was singing a little bit flat. And so what was really touching was that Zakk Wylde would step up and help him sing. It's like they were singing together and the crowd was helping out, and it was like this big group effort. And it gave me chills to feel that, to see that everybody was stepping up for Ozzy. I love how before Zakk plays any Randy solos, he like reaches up to the sky, almost like in dedication to Randy Rhoads. And they basically played all Randy songs, I believe, except for one. Zakk has always been really good about honoring the guitar players before him. Now, because Ozzy was stuck in that chair, basically, there were a few times, by the way, where he tried to get up. I think he wanted to, but his body just wouldn't let him. I might be, just guessing. Maybe he was just adjusting himself or, I don't know, other things. But that really put a lot of expectation on Zakk Wylde to kind of be the person to run around the stage. And so he would solo and he would go all the way stage left down the whole side, and then he would come back, and he was the one that's mobile basically. But I think everybody felt it when he announced that they're going to kick into Mama I'm Coming Home, because that's a song that when you think of the enormity of the night and his career and Black Sabbath and all that stuff and how it's all pretty much coming to an end, to play a song like that, it was going to tear at your soul. And so there's a lot of teary eyes. I have to admit, I felt it too, just thinking about what one person or one band, let's say, can do for your entire life. This is one of the tunes where Zakk Wylde really had to help out on vocals, but so did the crowd. But, you just look at everyone's faces and you could tell what everybody was feeling. I thought that could be the last tune because Ozzy was having a lot of trouble, but then they kicked into Crazy Train. And, that brought everybody's spirits back up. And that's when they finally showed Randy on the screen playing his Polka Dot V. And maybe they showed him earlier, but I didn't notice. But man, that was so cool when Zakk was doing the solo and Randy was doing it too, almost in sync on the video. I thought that was great. And I'm so glad they showed him because I feel like the night wouldn't have felt complete without that. Ozzy did forget the lyrics to the last verse of Crazy Train, but at that point, nobody cared. I didn't care. It was just like, Ozzy's doing it up. Just let him do his thing, Okay, it was time for the last band, Black Sabbath. Part of me was like, man, how are they going to pull this off? The original members are on stage. I didn't know if they were going to have the energy to get through it, knowing Bill Ward's health issues back in the day. But they played a big montage before they come out. And then that intro, with the bell for Black Sabbath, going into the siren for War Pigs. I thought that was really well made. That was a great idea. It was just hard for me to believe that that was the original band all on stage. Because when I saw Sabbath, they had Mike Borden on drums. So this is just so insane to see the original 4. War Pigs was kind of tricky, you know, that part where they stop, it's just the hi-hat, because Ozzy was a little bit off time, and then the audience tried to sing, and it felt like the band wasn't always sure when to do the 2 hits. Doo-doo. So it got a little bit loose for a while, but then they brought it back in. I kept thinking, man, Geezer looks unlike a Geezer to me. He looked very healthy. He looked very spry, if you will. And it just looked like he took good care of himself. And then when he kicked into the beginning of NIB, you know, he was playing that bass part perfectly, just real smooth. He looked real relaxed up there, like he's done it a million times, which he probably has. One thing I love about Sabbath is they keep the tempo true, real steady, real doomy when it needs to be. It's really easy when you're live in front of that many people just to kind of have your adrenaline take over. But man, he kept it real. For some bands, I don't love that, but for Sabbath, I think that's necessary to really get the depth of that, you know, groove. I also have to hand it to Tony Iommi because he was solid. You know, some of the solos that he did were like rock solid. His solo in Iron Man was great. He played all the riffs solid, even though he was tuned way down. I guess they were tuned down to A on a couple of those tunes. Like Iron Man was an A. That's 3.5 steps lower than standard E. Bill Ward took his shirt off, and I guess Tony made fun of him. He's like, dude, you look like Gollum up there. But, you know, hopefully they have a sense of humor about it. I kept thinking he looked like the guy from the Enter Sandman video by Metallica, you know? Really wish I had the confidence that Bill Ward had, because, man, he's just like, screw it. Doing it. I thought I was going to lose it before Paranoid because I knew that was the last tune.
Thank you from the bottom of my heart. I love you. We love you.
But then they kicked into it and the music kind of like pepped me up a little bit, you know? It's a lot of talking. I need water. Afterwards, it was a very bittersweet ending because Tony came up and he hugged Ozzy, and there was this moment where Ozzy just, his face, he looked like he was in shock. And then he looks up and the crowd cheers, and you could see that he was kind of misty-eyed, and you know, and then Geezer comes up and gives him like a cake or something. I wasn't sure what that was. But then, you know, it's kind of like the band disappears and we're in Ozzy's dream or something. And it's just him alone on stage and everything goes black. And it's just this weird, ominous moment. Like, oh my God, this is so bizarre. And then the stage starts rotating. And then that's the end of it. I kept thinking, I know this is morbid to think, but I kept thinking, man, did we just see the end of like heavy metal, the era that we all grew up in? Or most of us did. Is this the closing of the chapter? Or is it the passing of the torch? Like I said, anything big that comes to an end, not that all these bands are done or something like that, but it really just felt like, you know, a lot of our favorite bands, the guys are getting older. It's not going to last forever. Sabbath is done. Ozzy, you know, he's flirting with doing new music, but, you know, he's going to be done eventually. And then it's like, is it just gone? Or are people going to step up and actually, you know, take the reins and go to the next level with everything? Which I hope happens. So all you young kids out there, you know, step up. One of the bad things is I really wish Megadeth would have been on the bill. I think that would have been great because it would have been cool to have the big four at this show. It would have been epic. But, you know, not every band could be there. But it did feel weird that Megadeth wasn't there. You have to admit it. And one thing that shocked me was that the pay-per-view for this was only $30. I feel like Sharon was setting the prices, maybe not, but she could have made it 100. She could have gone crazy. But for them to make it available to us for $30, I thought that was a very generous thing. And so thank you, whoever set that price. But if you saw the concert, let me know what you thought of it in the comments section. Hopefully I didn't spoil it for people who haven't seen it yet, but I really hope you're able to watch the concert somehow. And, you know, tell me if I missed anything. Now, even though my voice is gone now, you know, speaking of people having trouble talking and singing, but I guess I should say thank you to Ozzy and Black Sabbath, because like all the other bands said, if they didn't exist, I wouldn't be doing what I do today. Simply because they were an influence, but they also influenced all the bands that eventually influenced all of us. So it's really cool that the originators of heavy metal are still around and can still play. That's just incredible to me. But thank you everyone for watching this video, and we'll catch you in the comments section or the next video. Okay, we'll see ya. Bye-bye.